Hello, welcome everyone. I'm here with Robert Forte. Do you pronounce the E?
Yes, very, very good. Thank
Good.
you.
Who is a fascinating person who I've met recently through our mutual friend Madhava Sethi. And we had a really lovely introductory conversation a week ago, not recorded. And he suggested several books, and I'm just really excited for this conversation. So, Robert you've studied and taught a lot of psychology and the history and psychology of religion, right? And you
Yes,
also have extensive experience talking about and researching and exploring the field of psychedelics.
true. Very
Yes,
true. Yes.
yes. And so this podcast is a podcast where I ask people essentially how they began to see the pattern or see through the pattern or see the matrix or whatever we want to call it, this experience that people are having of feeling like the narrative doesn't line up, and some people are seeing it and some people aren't. And one of Robert's terms is the psychology of non-perception, right? Will you
Good.
explain that?
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
First, I want to say that I want to thank you and congratulate you for undertaking this inquiry that you are, and the way Madhava presented it to me. That a lot of it has to do. You say the narrative, of course, the vaccine and COVID operation, and the subject that brought Madhava and I together originally was the subject of 9/11, and that I just want to say that these are some of the most challenging subjects that I have ever deeply inquired into. They demand everything of you, to really understand what's happening, and mostly 9/11 is a subject that I have some expertise in. It really requires a tremendous amount of courage. It requires a really good knowledge of and a reframing of what we've learned in modern American history. It's one of the darkest, most difficult
Yeah.
subjects of them all, in my estimation. When I was growing up, the nuclear weapon race was a big deal, and that was horrifying. But the bombing never actually happened. 9/11 goes even further than that. I mean, so
Right.
it really requires a lot of courage and intelligence and patience to penetrate through this massive and an incredibly effective psychological operation on the American people and the people of the world. So you are really, I think it's fantastic that you're doing that. It gives hope for generations to come, because here 9/11 is something that happened 25 years ago, and it's only starting to flicker up in the media again. And so let me just turn off this phone here for a second.
And that reminds me of something that I was thinking about this morning, which is, so in the lifetimes of people who are alive now, there have been three big events, I think, and that's in America: the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, and then COVID. And I think now it's very easy for regular people to say, yeah, there's suspicious stuff around the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, right. Well, that was the thing that really got me into this inquiry. We'll start talking about the psychology of non-perception. That I was already not quite 30 years old, and I had spent my whole young life as a student, and then really a scholar of psychology, and then consciousness, and then I had a real interest in politics, but my interest was really more about mysticism and states of consciousness. And then I got very interested in psychedelic drug research and the history of that. But one day, and I don't remember exactly the day, but somebody gave me a copy of the Zapruder film, which you probably know was Abraham Zapruder was an insurance executive, happened to be there in Dallas, and had a position on the grassy knoll, and with his Super 8 camera filmed the motorcade as it went by, and he captured the moment of the headshot that really killed Kennedy. And I say that, Kennedy was shot from different angles, different places, but it was the headshot, and you can see it clear as can be that the shots came from in front of him and struck him in the head and blasted him back. And I remember when John Kennedy, I was 6 years old when John Kennedy was killed, and it was a very big deal. But I didn't really ever spend any time on it. But this moment that I saw the Zapruder film was very shocking to me because it was obvious.
Yeah.
It was obvious that he was shot from the front. Yeah. And yet this enterprise was able to convince the American people, a sufficient number of the American people, that he was shot from the back by a guy, and they were able to put forth the story that once you start to look at it, it completely falls apart. It's utterly impossible.
Right.
And then it doesn't take much more to realize that what actually happened on that was a coup, and that the president was murdered. He was shot in the front of the head, and they were able to usher in this whole new enterprise. And that was like the law of the land. Yeah. And this was in the mid 80s when I finally caught on to it. And I was super alarmed, like, it just struck me like, how can that happen?
Right.
What are the mechanisms of mind control? What are the mechanisms? What's the apparatus in the country that's doing that? And it became really, I won't say an obsession, but I really dove deeply into wanting to understand all aspects of that.
Yeah.
And then,
well, so on the topic of the JFK, so you recommended these very cool books, which I ordered and received last week. Is that showing up in the correct way? Yeah. And so the top two, Timothy Leary Flashbacks and Mary's Mosaic, present a story about the assassination or an angle on the reason behind the assassination that I was completely unfamiliar with, having to do with Mary Pinchot and JFK's relationship and her desire to expose these powerful men to psychedelic drugs so that they would have a sense of not wanting to go to war. Is that how you? So,
but this is.
How you understood it?
This is. This is where my two great interests come together in this moment, in this. Not just the relationship between Mary Meyer and John Kennedy, Mary Pinchot and John Kennedy, but the reason that Timothy Leary was popularizing psychedelic drugs.
So can you talk about that?
Goes back even further, yes. And this is something that not very many people talk about this because not many people know the history as well as I do, and that's because the man that turned Timothy Leary on to psychedelic drugs, a man who's not well known outside of a smaller circle of scholars that look at these subjects, was my professor, and not just my professor, but my mentor for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And he was, Frank Barron was considered one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He was very well known for his research in personality assessment and particularly in the psychology of creativity. Yeah. And he and Tim were graduate students together at the University of California, Berkeley. They were both veterans of World War II. Mm-hmm. Frank was really more a veteran of actual combat, and Tim was just in the service. Mm-hmm. But they were very loyal Americans. They loved the concept of democracy. They loved what America stood for, this independent, individual spirit, the history of America as having, combated tyranny, and we had this democracy, and they loved those ideals. Yeah. And then they started to realize, along with many other social scientists of that era in the 40s and 50s, that American consciousness was beginning to show signs of what had happened in Nazi Germany, that we were becoming a very authoritarian, hyper-obedient, conformist society. And this is what had just happened in Germany, like this democracy for many years, a creative, vibrant culture suddenly somehow fell in line with these, this madman. and started doing these unbelievable, inhumane things to their fellow citizens. And Frank and Tim and Solomon Asch and Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo and so on. There were many social scientists in this period that were beginning to do these studies on the American psyche and realize, whoa, something's wrong here. We've lost our independence of judgment. And Frank Barron eventually became introduced to psilocybin mushrooms and had a very, very profound experience that was an enlightenment for him. And he realized this could be the thing that could wake people up and return that confidence in their own selves. Right. And that's why he encouraged Tim to take them. Yeah. And that's why they began this popular movement.
Okay. So the idea, first of all, going back to, I didn't realize that in the post-World War II era, there was this concern that Americans were becoming more obedient. Yeah. How was that playing out? Why were people saying that? And what do you think the causes were?
Okay, so first let me recommend a book for your listeners or for you who love books. This is a significant book that I read in the early 2000s, and it's written by John Dean, who was Richard Nixon's personal attorney, who sort of turned evidence and kind of went against Nixon and the whole Watergate thing. But he's a very important figure in American history. And he wrote a book called Conservatives Without Conscience. Mm-hmm. And he devotes a whole chapter in that book. It's called The Triumph of the Authoritarians. And it summarizes a lot of this research beginning in the 40s and 50s on American students at Ivy League schools, Yale, Swarthmore, various places. The first one of these, and maybe the most important, is Solomon Asch. Did these really brilliant, simple and brilliant studies that became one of the most researched, repeated experiments in the history of psychology. And anybody that's ever taken a psychology class at a college level has probably been exposed to this experiment.
Will you explain it?
Sure. So here you go. Imagine that you're a college student and someone comes up to you and says, here, for $5, we'd like to, you could take part in this test of your vision. And you say, okay, sure. And you're led to this room, and there's 19 other people in the room. And you think that those 19 people are just like you being taken off the campus and are part of the experiment. Well, they are part of the experiment, but they're Confederates. Only you are being tested. Mm-hmm. And so the experimenter does a very simple thing. He draws 4 lines on the chalkboard, and you are supposed to say which line is similar to which line. It's completely obvious, unambiguous question. And the 19 other people before you all give the wrong answer. Mm-hmm. They all give the same wrong answer. Mm-hmm. And now it's your turn to answer. What do you do?
Right. And
when I ask that question,
yeah,
everybody says, well, I would give the right answer. But actually what happened when Solomon Asch did this, like only, there are different conditions, but like 15 to 20%, 70 to 80% of the population. Again, these are at the top schools in the country. I can't remember. I think Asch did these at Swarthmore, but then he was also at University of Pennsylvania. And 80%, upwards of 80% of the population defies their own senses and gives the wrong answer in order to conform to the socially constructed group reality, even though it's obviously wrong.
Right. And so, it brings up so much, because you've spent so much time in psychological testing. I asked you this a week ago, and you said that Frank Barron had tried to understand what was different about the 15 to 20% who, will you explain what you
exactly.
There?
So Frank was, people that saw these results said this is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And Frank wanted to know, well, what was it about those people that didn't conform? And so he moved to the East Coast from Berkeley and hooked up with Solomon Asch and got his data and began interviewing the people who were the non-conformers,
Yeah.
and began to conduct personality research and profiles on these people. And this is what launched him on his career into the psychology of creativity, because they found that these were the people that were the more creative. They tended towards arts or it's scientific, but they were creative personalities. In other words, they had a sense of their own inner magic, their own inner creativity. Their locus of authority was inside of them, was their own consciousness, their own mentality. They didn't rely on the furor, on the institutions, or on social reality to define what was right to them. And so he began this. This was his career, and then it was just like 6 or 7 years into this that he was studying creative writers in Mexico when he was introduced to this mushroom.
Oh, wait. So when was the Solomon Asch experiment? Was it then in the 50s? Is that what you're saying?
Solomon Asch experiment, the first one, I believe, was in the late 30s.
Oh my.
Yeah, I think it was.
Wow.
I think it was in the late 30s, and then it was repeated and ongoing and then Frank caught wind of it. Frank and Tim were in graduate school from like 1945 to 1950, and that was the period of their PhD.
And that's when they became interested in the psilocybin.
Well, the psilocybin didn't actually come until Frank had his experience in 1958. So there's like a 2 decade. Frank took the mushroom in 1958, and immediately told Tim that this is the thing. This is the holy grail of psychology. This could be the thing to unlock the power. And Tim was dismissive and said, no way, I'm not going to fuck around with any mushrooms. You shouldn't talk like this. You're going to lose your credibility. And Frank kind of kept at him for a year, almost a year. And then finally, Tim had his opportunity. And then that's how that started.
Okay. So there's a couple threads I want to follow. One is, so the creativity thread is one thread. And also when Timothy Leary started essentially working with government agencies. So first, let's talk about the creativity thread. And I had asked you this via text and you had provided a link, but let's talk about it. So I went to art school in 1999 to like 2002 era. And even by that era, I would feel like art school had been heavily infiltrated by, let's say, a social programming. Like we were on the curriculum was like Julia Kristeva, who I was subsequently in the past 20 years exposed as an actual Soviet agent. And there was a lot of other stuff in art school that at that point in time, I feel like it was halfway between where it probably was in the 70s and where it is now, which I think is hyper-conformist now. So how did that happen, where these people who are drawn to creative paths are actually now becoming so conformist?
You mean now? How does that happen?
Yeah.
We talked about this a little bit. It's a complicated subject because people become drawn to the creative arts for different reasons. Some people just have to create.
Right.
And some people are drawn to the creative art, like medicine. Some people are drawn to medicine because they're natural healers. Some people are drawn to medicine because they think that's how they're going to be able to make a lot of money. So or they want the fame or the prestige of the doctor. So, to really answer that question is that's a tricky.
I mean, I think you're pointing at the answer, which is that, we think of creatives as artists, but really a person can be highly creative in any field.
Definitely.
And I think because art has become one of the primary means of propaganda, meaning film
Well,
and
that's
music, etc., has become one
right,
of the yeah.
right,
So
right.
so it's encouraging people who are interested in spreading propaganda to enter those fields. And of course, because it's an academic field, the faculty is encouraging that as well.
Yep. And this goes back a long way in history, of course. The employment of the artist to as
Mm,
um, as a propaganda apparatus.
yeah,
Like you can't go through a museum in Europe without seeing baby Jesus all over the. They commissioned the greatest artists to do these. Everything is Jesus, and now it's you know, and now another book I can recommend to your friends and listeners is a book called Who Paid the Piper? Who Paid the Piper? And it's by a woman with the funny name of Frances Stoner,
Hmm.
and it's about the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which
When
was a
was
CIA a
Oh,
CIA front
uh-huh,
that infiltrated the arts and directed the arts in the post-war Cold War period
uh,
to as a public relations vehicle for American democracy and to further the agenda of the Cold War. It's very important,
right.
and it also intersects with the psychedelic story.
Mhm. I have a okay, following on the cr who is less susceptible to the Solomon Asch experiment, I have a question which you might not know the answer to, but, I was recently I've never, of course, been in a Solomon Asch experiment, I don't know how I would do, but I was recently reviewing a Big 5 psychological test that I had taken, like, 6 years ago, and because I was curious about the stance towards authority that a person might have, and I'm a, law-abiding person, but I score very, very low, 9% on politeness. Do you know what that means? Is this the anti eth do you
No, go ahead.
you
No,
understand what I'm talking about, right?
yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's kind of the American mythos,
Yeah,
that we're like in our very nature, since we were children.
yeah,
This myth of America, we are anti-authoritarian,
right.
right? Yeah, and I wanted to comment on something you said that you've never been in a Solomon Asch experiment because I frequently, just to go back to 9/11 for a minute,
Yeah.
this is like an
Mm,
enormous Solomon Asch experiment.
yes.
And one of the things that was very interesting about our first conversation is that you said, um, you kind of got it right away. It didn't seem like it was.
N n well, not in 2001. I never saw the videos because I went to art school. I didn't have TV. And I
Yeah,
actually never saw any videos of 9/11 until probably after 2020, which is ridiculous, I know,
yeah,
but
that is
j
ridiculous. Yeah. But
I
that's why you were
yeah,
free. That's why you
yeah,
weren't so much conditioned
yeah.
with the propaganda.
Right, and there was that period of time, obviously, post 9/11, YouTube started in 2005 or 2006, where it was almost impossible to find video on the internet prior to 2005, 2006, and by that time, the story was, for some people, subsiding. I also
Yeah.
was in Maine, I didn't know anyone in New York.
Did you
So
go to
it
art school in New York or
No,
where
no,
did you?
in Maine.
In Maine.
So
Okay.
I've only been to New York, like, 6 times in my life,
Uh-huh.
which perhaps sounds crazy also.
Well, that's lucky in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So, but going back to, the Solomon Asch experiment of 9/11, which is funny, there's these if you want to talk pattern recognition, there's these parallels with the buildings and the height and all. Maybe that's going too far, but
Yeah. No, no, I mean, it's part of understanding this because
yeah,
this thing that I work with, the psychology of non-perception, it's the study of how the obvious becomes invisible.
yeah,
I mean, it's obvious when you look at the buildings that
right.
that's a controlled demolition.
Yeah,
Never before in the history of architecture
right.
have steel frame buildings come down perfectly symmetrically like
Right.
this. The only way that can happen is if there's charges put at very strategic locations to bring the building down.
Yeah.
and yet they were somehow able to push this story through.
Yeah.
And
And
that's the really fascinating thing to me as you know, a student and scholar of psychology.
it's absolutely fascinating. And let's see, I wasn't able to watch one of the videos you had sent, but I was able to watch the um, it, series of things that Madhava spoke at on Sunday, which had this interview between, um, let's see, I have his book right here, David Ray Griffin and Tucker Carlson in like 2005 or 2006.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that was a perfect example of how people were using emotion
Right.
and what do we call it? Social pressure
Right.
to prevent people from seeing.
Right. This smartass kid,
Yeah.
you know, barely out of college,
Mhm.
calling one of the most respected theologians of the modern era blasphemous.
Yeah.
It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah,
And
it
then
is.
this is the whole nother part of it, because now, of course, we have Tucker Carlson is one of the people who's been coming up with questioning the story.
Right.
That's a whole nother interesting phenomena here.
Yeah.
And God, I would love to meet him and really try to understand. I sort of jokingly say that he owes me a whole lot of money.
What?
Because you know, when I got into this in soon after it happened, 3 or 4 years after it happened, my father was a very, very conservative person who loved Tucker Carlson.
Uh-huh.
And I would say to my father, you know, Dad, this is crazy. This can't be. And he said, oh, come on. He said, if that were true, if what you're saying is true, Tucker Carlson would be all over it.
Oh,
And
really?
I persisted, and, you know, and I got my father really lost a lot of respect for me because he thought I had, you know, gone crazy, that I was asserting these completely, you know, impossible ideas in terms of his worldview.
Yeah.
And now Tucker Carlson is all over it.
Mhm.
Maybe. I mean, that's
Right.
a whole nother discussion there, and whether we trust Tucker Carlson or is he still in, because Tucker Carlson was like a, you know, a champion of the whole media manufacturing consent, to use Noam Chomsky's phrase,
Right.
you know?
You were saying he was a champion of using the media to manufacture
Yeah,
consent?
yeah, he was a main guy, you know.
Right.
I mean, he was like a liberal Republican, but he was, you know, Fox News and that whole enterprise. And the way he was with David Ray Griffin, just like, you know, squelching dissent and
Yeah.
ridiculing it. And
I mean, it is hard to see how someone could read this book, and let's just assume that he's presenting true facts, like, that he researched. It's everything in the book is it is hard to see how someone could read this stuff and not be willing to consider that it might be a different story.
well, that's another very important tenet of the
Yeah.
psychology of non-perception. And so we have a lot of examples in history and in ordinary life where this happens.
Mhm.
Like, take the very unfortunate situation of childhood sexual abuse
Right.
by parents or teachers
Mhm.
or clergy,
Right.
which is not uncommon. And it's not uncommon for children who are abused to completely stuff those memories
Mhm.
from their consciousness and not even, like, completely block it out.
Right.
And it's the same kind of psychological mechanism that explains 9/11. That it's the theory of cognitive dissonance,
Right.
that your teacher or your parent or your clergy man or woman is someone who you look up to. Your life depends on them. They love you. You know, you can't, and yet they're also abusing you in these, you know, awful ways. The dissonance between those two cognitions is too much, and so the psyche just,
Right.
you know, and so then those things remain hidden. And it's
Okay.
the same
Yeah.
thing with people that see Americans. I
Yeah.
don't know about you, but when I grew up, we started every single day in school, in elementary school. We had to stand up and
Yeah.
put our hands on our hearts
We did
and
too.
say the Pledge of Allegiance. This is very literally a hypnotic technique
Hmm.
that puts people in a trance that their country is God's favorite one, and we are, like all the other ones, have problems with dictators or poverty, but we, no, we have liberty and justice for all. We are, it's a holy, solemn vow. Every single day, you put yourself in this trance.
Yeah.
And now it doesn't go away. Communism is bad, the Russians are bad, and
Yeah.
we are the best.
Hmm.
And now someone tries to tell you when you're 25 or whatever that actually there's some real darkness here. There's some real evil that has intervened in your country, and people are just like, don't even tell me that.
Right.
So,
But so that brings up the difference between a child has a different psychological makeup than and then should have an adult, let's say. An adult is supposed to be bringing in, incarnating spiritually, a higher psychological makeup that allows them to see more accurately. And a
mhm,
child obviously needs protection in various ways, and their psychological ability to disconnect or disassociate is one of those methods.
mhm.
So why do you think that we have so many adults who are still willing to disassociate from
Well, I
what
think, I mean, in spite, I agree with you that adults are supposed to be more mature than children, but there's a real ceiling on our intellectual and spiritual development as a
Yeah,
result of our modern education, and so they still act in many ways just like children. Like I noticed you'd noticed some of my I put a little thing on Substack the other day
yeah,
because I've been thinking about this conversation we were going to have, and people still act like children, and it's and I've so where are we now? This is 2025. I mean, I spent 10 years of my life on 9/11. I was a
mhm,
real activist. I really wanted to help break the case,
right,
and it was one of the most brutal and difficult periods of my life. And I
really,
couldn't really talk about it because I was so depressed about it, realizing what had happened to my country and what had happened to people that I respected and how they just were. And so I just kind of stuffed it for many years because I didn't want to share what I knew, because I didn't want to put people through the same ordeal that I went through.
right,
But now I have a more of a sense of humor about it, and so I'm beginning to engage a little bit more. And I don't know. I guess some reason I'm saying this is that I don't want to seem arrogant or, what this guy was criticizing me in the Facebook thing. But it's really just like talking to children who believe in Santa Claus.
and so I saw that comment thread, and of course, I actually think that was, AI written. Did you notice that? Yeah,
Yeah, his was AI. I don't know if
yeah,
he's an AI
right,
bot or if he just.
right,
I was thinking of publishing because I had old conversations with AI about 9/11 that were, very different from that.
interesting, yeah,
But when you say to someone who believes the official story of 9/11 and you ask them like, how do you believe that?
right.
They will answer with the same like epistemological sophistication of a person who believes in Santa. Well, my parents told me. I saw I saw Santa Claus on at the mall or on I sat in his lap. He told me. Well, what about the flying reindeer? Well, Santa Claus is special. Like the Santa Claus flying through the air following reindeer. That makes about as much sense in terms of the laws of nature as the buildings coming down straight because of fire.
Right, absolutely. So, okay, will you, how did you come to be exposed to the 9/11 story?
Well, was sort of really good luck and really bad luck at the same time. I was I was invited to New York to make a movie about, I was living in California, and I was invited to New York to by a film company who read my book on Timothy Leary. And we had a nice connection. This was in August of 2001, and they asked me if I could stay. And then to kind of sweeten the pot, they offered to introduce me to a friend of theirs who happens to be one of my favorite actresses, who starred in one of my favorite movies, which happens to be a movie about the Third Reich's quest for occult power to control the world. And that's really what happens on 9/11. 9/11 is the culmination of decades of mind control and subversion of democracy. So I end up meeting this amazing woman who, after 3 or so weeks, becomes my lover. I wake up in her bed on the morning of September 11th on the Upper West Side of New York. And it was a very, like, you wake up and you're like in a dream and you're in love, and you're both in love with this incredibly fantastic person. And then a few minutes later, the explosions happen just like 4 miles away. This is one of a phrase from the psychology of religion, that the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites.
Oh, wow.
The unification of the opposites. And that's what it was like for me, like feeling like I'm in a heaven realm. I'm negotiating a film deal. This beautiful woman who I've been, like, admiring, seen all her movies, calling me darling, like, what is going on here? And then, boom, my best friend from childhood is in one of these towers that's been seeming like it's been hit by a plane. And like, what is going on here?
You knew someone who died, or someone who
No,
was...
it turned out that he didn't go to work that day, and that's another story. But
right.
So then, and then 2 or 3 nights after, I was having dinner with some people, and I'm going to not mention names, but somebody quite close to me in my family, who happened to be a senior vice president of a very large asset management company in New York, and he managed a hedge fund. Like, he was responsible for literally billions of dollars in investments, a big Wall Street wonk. And he mentions to my father and I that he knew this was going to happen, that people from the government advised him, and they acted accordingly to anticipate the radical change in certain stocks, insurance stocks, airline stocks, New York real estate stocks. There was a huge transfer of wealth that day. And I kind of ignored him. My father had only recently been recovering from open heart surgery, and we didn't discuss politics very well. So I was just like, let's just stay cool here. And then I went back to my now girlfriend's apartment, and we talked about it for a little bit. And she had no interest in, that thing, those like government conspiracies. Her father actually was very high up in the FBI, and she just went into the arts. And she's like, as soon as I start talking about it, she was like, yeah. And so I just said, I've spent years studying these challenging, dark subjects. I'm not going to get into it either. So for 3 years, whenever anybody mentioned to me that something about 9/11, I would sometimes angrily scoff at them and say, come on, that's bullshit. It couldn't be so. And that was my position until I was at a party when somebody mentioned to me that David Ray Griffin wrote a book about this.
And you already knew who David Ray...
I knew David Ray Griffin because I have a degree in the history and psychology of religion from the University of Chicago. And David Ray Griffin was well known as one of the most rigorous scholars of the philosophy of religion. He taught at Harvard and Chicago, and started the Process Studies Center at Yale, at Claremont University. And he was a brilliant man. In fact, I had the good luck to meet him 20 years earlier. An old girlfriend was studying with him. He kind of saved my life, in fact, because this same person that admitted foreknowledge of 9/11 offered me a position in New York. And I went back to New York and thought I would maybe work on Wall Street for a couple of years before going to graduate school to study religion. And Griffin sort of talked me out of that.
Mhm.
And then 20 years later, someone says he wrote a book about something that at the time I thought was just a fringe conspiracy theory. And she put the book in my hand, and I read that. That's a very dense book.
Yeah.
And I read it in like 2 days. I couldn't
Yeah.
put it down.
Yeah, it's
And he
fascinating.
mentions in there about the activity on Wall Street that some people obviously knew because they made these deals.
Yeah.
And then I just realized that I had to do something about this as an American. It felt like my moral duty to see if I could help. So I contacted Griffin right away, and I said, I would like to help you with what you mean. This is, and he said, what do you want to do?
Mhm.
And I said, well, I want to get more people to read your book. And so I got a bunch of copies, and I said, I want to start with Noam Chomsky, because I'd loved Noam Chomsky. I was was I at that time? No, a few years earlier, I was teaching at the university, and I would have my students read Noam Chomsky and how he dissects the role of the media and manufacturing consent. And I thought, why isn't he writing this? Why don't we get people of that stature? And so then I got, I had this correspondence with Noam Chomsky, and I realized that for a guy who was so intelligent, seeming intelligent and rational and passionate and devoted to justice, he refused to read the book. He
So
refused.
why do you think that was?
Well, I think that is because he that's not his job.
What do you
His
think
job,
his job?
I think his job is, and this is when I learned this term, a gatekeeper.
Mhm.
Like, ask anybody, Noam Chomsky, they'll say he's the most fierce critic of American foreign policy. One of the New York Times calls him one of the most influential intellectuals of our time. And so if Noam Chomsky isn't, he defines the spectrum of what's legitimate.
Mhm.
And if Noam Chomsky isn't going after it, it's like my father with Tucker Carlson. Well, if Tucker Carlson isn't, then it's, and Chomsky has the same position with 9/11 as he does with the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, he really?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so do you think he is or knowingly being
Yes,
intellectually dishonest?
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never,
Wow.
I wish I had this correspondence still, but it was,
Yeah.
I don't have it anymore, but it was about for 2 weeks, fired emails back and forth.
Mhm.
And, and I never really got to say that to him.
Yeah.
And so I don't actually know. I do know, and I think I might have shared this with you once in our last conversation, that it was either Chomsky or Chomsky's very good friend, philosophy professor at MIT, who said, speaking of the Kennedy assassination, if they're powerful enough to kill the president and powerful enough to cover it up, then they're too powerful to be confronted directly. And so I'm giving Chomsky like, okay, this is, maybe it's like, a multi-level chess game or something, and that you can't attack right there, right now. You have to boo-boo. But I don't really feel that anymore. And I think especially with this stuff with Chomsky and his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and
Yeah.
I think that in a totalitarian society, a totalitarian government, which is what we have to accept the United States is,
Yeah.
that they control everything. That one of the ways that totalitarian societies, and of course there's a lot of research in this, one of the ways that totalitarian societies survive is that they appear like they're free societies.
Right.
and they actually hire people to look like they're really fierce critics. And then someone can say, well, look, we have free speech. We got people like Noam Chomsky, you know.
Right.
So
And really, so that speaks to, in so many ways, we haven't had outright censorship that I saw until 2020. And because, yeah, you can go find all the divergent opinions. They're not in New York Times, of course, but they are there
yeah.
until 2020. And that was actually one of the triggers for me early on, like April or May of 2020. I had seen a video by an American doctor, and I had seen the video because my mom had sent it to me. And there was nothing like that we would consider censorable. It wasn't inflammatory in any way. Certainly wasn't proposing violence or anything like that. And then 2 weeks later, I clicked on the same link that my mom had sent me, and the video had been removed from YouTube for violating community guidelines. And that was like, so that was the first time in my life I had seen explicit censorship of something that was a purely intellectual video or discussion. And I don't think that, I mean, maybe it was happening before 2020 on YouTube and those sites, but it wasn't obvious.
Yeah, well, that's one of their tricks. In fact, that's something that Timothy Leary once said when we were discussing the CIA, and he said, because Tim kind of went in and out of working with or for and against the CIA. And he said, look, Robert, if I was working for the CIA, I would tell them to get their best journalists on exposing all of their worst things and just put it out there. And then it becomes sort of normalized. It's again like, well, it can't be that bad because we have free speech, and that's really something to think about.
Yeah. So the normalization, yeah, that's interesting. And so many things have become normalized.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the boiling frogs. Have you ever tuned into Sibel Edmonds? She's a journalist that you would like, and she had a website for a while called The Boiling Frogs, which is and she kind of made her mark during the early days of the 9/11 movement. She was a translator, and she caught some, she was working with CIA or FBI and overheard some conversations and transcribed them, and nobody followed up on it. And if they had, but so she's the boiling frog thing. So now here we are, 2025, and it's like, I mean, it drives me a little crazy to hear, people who are so upset about Donald Trump and, oh no, fascism is coming to America. We've got this monstrous guy. And look, he's obviously an odious, to me anyway, despicable kind of guy. But America's been a fascist military dictatorship since 1963.
So on that note, what do you think is the way out of it? Because we know that the political system doesn't provide what people think they're voting for.
Yeah. Well, I want to answer that question in a way that is very optimistic.
Yeah.
But it's going to sound really pessimistic. And so the answer to me is, in the psychologies and cosmologies of India, for example, the goal of life is to be this realm that we inhabit now. This sentient realm is variously known as samsara or Maya. It's a realm they're depicted. The samsara is depicted as a wheel. In the center of the wheel is greed, hatred, delusion.
Yeah.
That this is a fallen realm. We're in a sorry state. The Buddhists call it dukkha. There's a fundamental unsatisfactoriness, deception, illusory quality to the world we inhabit. And that the goal of life is to become liberated from it. And and then along with these ideas, there's a concept in his Hindu cosmology of the Kali Yuga. That Yuga means world age, and these are spans of time of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. And they're, all this stuff is open to interpretation, of course, but the idea is that we are in what's called the Kali Yuga, which is an age of adharma, which means not truth and deception. And that, and so 9/11 gives us an opportunity to really witness how corrupt the apparatus, the mechanisms of our government and economic system are. There's like almost no hope to right that ship.
Right.
I'm a guy who was born in Boston and had this American, patriotism, and my country is so good, and I want to do good things and preserve democracy and all these things. And it's like in a hamster wheel or something. And
Right.
it's and so I have this idea that I developed in what I'm writing. I call it 9/11 as a fulcrum of awakening. And it shows you, like, don't waste your time. I'm also almost 70 years old. In a couple of weeks, I begin my 70th year. So I'm in this phase of my life where it's like, okay, I'm letting go. It's time to let go of all that deception, all those traps, and pursue another octave of existence.
Yeah.
And so, I tell people, like, this is like, forget. Madhav and I kind of debate this because, he's 10 or so years younger than me. And I kind of kid him, like, you're still a youngster, man. You get out there and kick ass, and I'm going to support you. But in my own personal life, I encourage people, like, to get into things like permaculture and, set up your own little, I call them sane asylums, where you have your communities, and you're growing your own food, and you're educating your own children with each other, and you're just not taking part in that society anymore, because you're just going to, unless you can penetrate the 9/11 deception, which is why we're talking now, because I would love to see a movement of really smart young people like yourself, like, waking up and realizing that, whoa, what have we let happen to our government, to our country?
Right. Yeah. So I have another friend who kind of refers to these as reality tunnels. And when I think of the idea of, you said a couple different things. So one, I think you said, is like, change your own consciousness and change the consciousness of people around you and build the good, which makes total sense. And live in the reality of the good, where we are going to perceive truth, but we're also going to build gardens and build, homeschooling and build our own sense of inquiry. And then the question becomes, and this is more true for people on the earlier side of their life, which I'm in the halfway point of my life, is there an obligation to try to bring information to other people? Is it even right to, if people don't want to know?
Well, these are all big issues, Brooke. I think about this. Sometimes I think about 9/11 like a mystery school. And that it's really for I was raising my son during the period of my most intense involvement, and sometimes I regret for letting him know what was going on, because
Really?
it's too much, and this kind of confrontation of the shadow at the wrong developmental stage can be overwhelming. And so I don't even really talk about it unless I'm asked to talk about it. And then another thing has to do with what stage of how old you are, what stage of life you're in. I love this Sanskrit word, ashrama dharma, which means the truth about the stages of life.
Oh.
And so, you're a young person, you're a student, you're a parent, you're you're working, you're doing your business, you're in government, that's how a society maintains itself.
Yeah.
People have to be in there doing stuff. Some people have to be cleaning the streets. Some people have to be dentists. Some people, you work in the world in order for the society to function. But then at some point, eventually, you become older, and then you become interested in philosophy and religion and transcendence, and you let go of all of that stuff, and you begin to resonate with higher ideals. So it really depends on where you are in your life and what is the truth. What is your, again, I'm saying all these Sanskrit words because I think they're relevant. Svadharma, like what is your truth?
Mm-hmm.
And and for me, my truth now is just cultivating beauty and really savoring. One of my teachers was a Vietnamese Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, to really savor what is not wrong,
Right.
to really cultivate an appreciation for the beauty of existence with your eyes wide open. Like, you asked me in a text, like good and evil. Yeah, I don't, it's a dualistic world. You can't really have good unless there's evil. There's a dynamic that causes it. That's a sort of polarity that gives the universe its existence.
Yeah. That reminds me of a book I've been reading recently, which, because you're in Greece, it might be someplace close by to you. There's I guess he's a Greek Orthodox saint of the last century named Saint Porphyrius. And he was in Greece on Mount Athos for a good period of his life, which they call the Holy Mountain. But his book, as someone who's an outsider to Christianity, but I consider myself Christian, but I haven't been involved in traditional branches of it. His book is beautiful, and it's just he says over and over, yes, there's evil, but focus on the good, and that becomes a controversial statement in some mainstream versions of religion or Christianity, because this idea that we make the good by focusing on the good, that could even be controversial is kind of and so this is always the nuance of doing work like just like this podcast. How do we talk about what's this process of consciousness without focusing too much on the negative side? I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, that's what the spiritual path is. It's about
Yeah.
integrating and negotiating these immense challenges and incredible gift of incarnation here.
Yeah.
And so 9/11 is, in my life and for people that have really approached it, it's, as I said at the beginning, all of these issues come into play.
Right.
And I don't know what's going to happen here next. I am fascinated by Tucker Carlson's turnaround. I don't completely trust it.
Right.
But it's like a Netflix show to me. Like I'm so curious, like what the next episode is going to be.
Yeah. We've been talking an hour. I wonder if maybe in the future we could have another conversation about MK Ultra, which we talked about a lot.
Yeah, I'd love to. MK, this is, 9/11 is the culmination of MK Ultra. Let's just say that for now, that MK Ultra is not just these experiments, these nasty experiments they did with prostitutes and prisoners that get a lot of. MK Ultra was an operation to mind control the whole society and pull off stunts like this. And so, let's pick it up there.
Okay, good.
Really, I want to thank you. It's such a pleasure. I expect to come to the States in January and try to beat Madhava in chess, and then maybe we can all meet up and have.
That sounds lovely. Okay, good. I hope that'll work. So I'll thank you so much.
Thank
Robert.
you.
This has been great.
God bless.
You too. Take care.